So, 2001: Space Odyssey. I did not see this movie till I want to say the late '90s, early 2000s. I'm assuming it was some kind of anniversary because it was all over TV and at the time, I think, and that's the first time I'd seen it. Of course, I knew about the movie. I knew about the HAL 9000, the the uh the apes at the beginning. Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew all the all the pop culture stuff about it. But for some reason, I assumed the movie was made in late or like early '80s, and for some reason, I remembered that the character Dave was played by Ed Harris. I always thought Ed Harris played in it for some reason.
Oh, you probably were confusing it with The Abyss.
The Abyss, yeah, that's what it was.
Right.
So when I finally watched it, and when we first see our the first people in the I guess the
Space Station.
space station, I immediately knew, okay, this is definitely not the '80s. This is, and so I was like amazed at the special effects. At that point, I was just like, I cannot believe that this was made in the '60s.
Right. Well, that is the great, I suppose it's considered one of the most important films in certainly American film history, maybe in the history of world cinema as well. It's the most important thing is that the techniques that we use to push special effects beyond what they had been previously. I sent you a couple of files of movies that were considered the sort of the go-to movies as far as space travel, depiction of
Right,
space travel. Two of them were done by George Pal, Conquest of Space and Destination Moon. And when you look at those movies, and those were only made like 10 years earlier, it's almost, I mean, George Pal was Mr. Puppetoons. He was the guy that developed Puppetoons, the animated cartoon thing. Uh, these look like almost like puppet shows, colorful. They made an attempt to be scientifically accurate, but at that point, they didn't have any clear idea of how those things would play out, how space travel would eventually develop. Even in '66, it wasn't clear to everyone how things would play out. We already had a space program, obviously, but Kubrick made the decision to call in folks who were involved in, folks who worked at NASA, people that were involved in the aerospace industry, and folks that were involved in technology in all sorts of areas to get their best advice about what the future would look like.
right, yeah.
They weren't shooting too far into the future. It was only like 35 years that they were, which might be a mistake. Maybe they should have put it a little
A little
further
further,
out.
yeah.
But yeah, the special effects techniques, that's, I guess, where Kubrick's special genius comes in. He had an understanding of cinematography because he had been a photographer, and he knew all about lighting, and he knew about all sorts of things that you could do on film. And also he had an attitude of not going with what the experts, the people who normally would be making these type of movies would say, but bringing in new people who had never worked on movies, and so they had no idea what the limitations were.
Right.
And very often that's great innovations in movies come from people who just don't know that they're not supposed to do this,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a big step forward, a great leap actually for the depiction of space travel and for science fiction. That's just the technological aspects of it are just one reason why it stands out. The other thing is there never was really, in terms of storytelling, there never was a Hollywood film or an American film that took this sort of approach to storytelling. The sort of opaque way the story is told, where nothing is explained. And that was the great curse with most science fiction movies previously, was that they always wanted to explain everything. They'd explain how the technology worked, or they had to explain. When you watch like Destination Moon or Conquest of Space, they always have unlikely people going into space. First of all, there's always a guy from Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and you realize what they're using is the model of World War II movies, the sort of characters that you would see on a submarine mission or fighter pilots, bombing raids, or army, the grunts, the dog faces in army movies. And in that, it makes sense that you would have like some guy who seems like he should be running a candy stand or a pizzeria. But in a movie where you're saying these are the top people, these are the folks we're putting into space, you would expect folks that are serious professional people with a degree of sobriety and gravitas. And you don't see that in those movies. And I think the reason why they use those characters is if the character seems stupid, then you could have another character explaining everything to them.
Yeah.
So you were able to explain to the audience. Like, for instance, there's always a scene, I think in both of those movies, there's a scene where once they get up into space, with all the preparation and planning, once they get up into space, they seem to be amazed at weightlessness.
Yeah.
Somebody has to explain, oh, that's the way it is in space. There's no weight, gravity. Why would that be? Why would people who are actually astronauts, why would they have to have that explained to them?
Explain to them, yeah.
So Kubrick got rid of all the explanation, and he just depicted this vision of how it would be in space. He did the same with the prehistoric stuff. He didn't tell you
what was going on. Yeah.
I just depicted it, and you were left to figure it out yourself.
Aaron, did you finally make it through this movie?
Yes, I did. Yeah, the only thing I knew about this movie before I watched it was all the references, on the different TV shows. I guess it has that status in, a cult-like status, I guess you could say. Like they just grab different things on different TV shows like The Simpsons and other comedies. So, that's where my knowledge came from. Then I sat down and watched it, and, it is a very nicely done film, cinematography wise, everything. I enjoyed that part of it. And yeah, it's, for me, like older films, there's a lot more dialogue. And I guess I got spoiled because of all the other horror movies we covered. And sci-fi, it's like quick and to the point. Oh shit, there's an alien on board. We got to get rid of this thing, instead of, the dialogue, that very heavy dialogue back in the day, which I'm not going to fault it for that at all. I guess I can fault my pea brain for that one. But I just, that's where it would lose me sometimes. Like, okay, like, where's the point, and get to it, and like you said, I was like, oh, they're all astronauts. What the, why are you explaining all this stuff in space? They should know this. Like, what's going on here? But it Stanley Kubrick, he has that style about him, and the movies that I really like of his, like A Clockwork Orange, and I mean that's a crazy film in itself. And of course, when he did The Shining as well. So yeah, this one, that, like I said, I went into this with, oh, okay, they use this in a lot of references. And when I started watching it, I'm like, okay, this is nicely done, And it's during that time. Would you say it was made, Carey, in the 60s, like late 60s?
They started shooting it in 66 and it was released in 68.
Yeah.
So 68. So that's before Star Wars. Well, Star Wars.
Well before.
Oh yeah, well before, yeah.
So I guess you could say that kind of inspired, George Lucas a little bit, seeing films like that.
He said as much. As a matter of fact, the famous scene that Star Wars opens with the spaceship coming down, seemed to go on endlessly. That was his little riff on the scene, the first shot of the Jupiter mission ship going by the screen. It seems to go on and on and on. I mean, this is one of those movies, I think, that falls into the category of stuff you really have to see on a big screen.
Yeah.
It really has no impact if you're watching it on a small screen, because the whole idea, it was actually the intent that it be an immersive thing that you see in a theater. It wasn't, and this is one of the few films that Kubrick made in the widest possible aspect ratio, widescreen aspect ratio. It was released in Cinerama, shot in, I guess, Panavision, and released in Cinerama. So it was the widest possible picture that you could have. And the whole idea was to experience it, not to understand it. So, although really, in all honesty, I saw this first when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And as a child, I had no difficulty really understanding it, because I just sort of let it take me where it was going. There wasn't the adult inclination to say, what does this mean? Or why isn't this like other movies I've seen of this kind? And it was very frustrating to the critics as well. This wasn't particularly well received when it was first released. It was only over time, which is something that happens with a lot of Kubrick's films, over time, people began to appreciate that it was a big breakthrough. That's the other problem for anybody who's seeing it now for the first time. There's really no way to appreciate the extraordinary impact that it had, because there had been nothing like this, for
Yeah, I
all
was
of
thinking
these.
today, I was like, I wish I would have seen this before I seen Star Wars and all the, you know what I'm saying? And I wish I would have seen it
Yeah.
on the big screen. I think I would have been blown away if I would have seen this on the big screen in '68.
Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling that if you were able to see it on a big screen even now, you probably would be
Well,
impressed.
yeah.
But
Well,
you have to be in the right frame of mind, and you have to be prepared for something that is going to challenge you, because that's the other aspect of it, is that back in the 60s, mid 60s, for almost a decade before, we had all these European films that were being done by people like Ingmar Bergman and Fellini and well, a whole host, Antonioni and a whole bunch of other folks. Movies like Last Year at Marienbad, for instance, which is a really challenging movie for audiences. To this day, I can't really figure out what's going on in that movie. Most of the things, and Persona, the film that Ingmar Bergman did, I think just a few years before 2001 got started, that's an intentionally challenging movie. And the European filmmakers were saying, we're not making entertainment, this is an art, and we're trying to take things to the next level. And Kubrick, by 1966, he was already regarded as one of the great filmmakers in the world. So he had a need to make sure that he wasn't just making a piece of entertainment that the audience would enjoy. He had to make something that would really be challenging to the audience and groundbreaking in the storytelling style. So the first thing he did was throw out the narration. There was Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the screenplay for this in collaboration with Kubrick. Arthur C. Clarke is more in the other direction. He wants to explain everything.
Everything, yeah.
And if you read his script, you see all the stuff that Kubrick threw out, including the narration, which if he had included it, it would have destroyed the movie, I think. It would have seemed like an educational film that you showed to, fifth graders.
Yeah, when I was watching that, I was thinking the only thing the opening scene are missing is David Attenborough talking over top of it.
Right.
That's the only thing missing over those opening scenes.
And it's sort of similar in a way to what happened with Blade Runner. And Ridley Scott is a big fan of 2001. He didn't want the narration. That was something that was forced on him by the company that was financing the film. And Harrison Ford didn't want it, and he intentionally sabotaged it by doing it so badly he figured they would never be able to use it, but they did anyway. But when you watch Blade Runner without the narration, suddenly it becomes very immersive. You feel like you're slipping into that world. You're able to appreciate the emotion and drama of it much better than when you're hearing that tinny voice over the whole thing. There are some things where, especially with science fiction, you need to just sort of accept what you're seeing. You shouldn't be questioning it, because the truth of the matter is they can't give you an explanation. They don't know themselves. This is just a prediction of what it might be like. They can't actually give you the nuts and bolts of how the thing works, because they don't know. It's all made up. So the best thing to do is to not to put on a pretense of knowing how the science is actually going to work. The best thing to do is to just take all that stuff out and let the scenes play out and speak for themselves. But I can see if you saw this on a TV, oh boy. I mean, I was the biggest fan of this when I was a kid, but my fandom was based on the few times I saw it in theaters. When I started to watch it on VHS, I thought to myself, this is unendurable, because it's just nothing. There's nothing to get involved with in it. But all the things that people might cite as flaws, like the critics said, oh, there's no real human beings, there's no backstory, there's no humor, there's no romance. That wasn't unintentional. He intentionally took all those things out because he had a particular idea of what type of thing he was trying to do. And it wasn't the traditional Hollywood melodrama.
Right. So is this movie pretentious?
Well, I don't necessarily know if pretentiousness is a bad thing, but yes, it has certain pretensions. First of all, it's trying to tell a story about the evolution of humankind from the beginning of time into the distant future. So that could come across as a pretentious thing. Rather than saying it's pretentious, I would rather look at the things that it predicts, the ideas that it has. It has a number of big ideas that they're putting forward, and critique those ideas. Are they still valid? Were they even valid then? And I have a whole list of ideas that I can favor you with if you're interested. But the thing about Kubrick is, you say he's pretentious, but the truth of the matter is he was a very well-read guy. He was a very smart guy. People say he's a genius. It's a good case that he was. So is it pretentiousness when Albert Einstein comes up with the theory of relativity? No, that's the guy. He's got this. He's got the real stuff. In Kubrick's case, he wasn't on the level of Albert Einstein, obviously, and he may not have even been intellectually on the same level as like Tarkovsky, the Russian director, who could, stand on his own as a philosopher. He was a really brilliant guy, brilliant, I think, on a level that was beyond Kubrick. But when you look at Kubrick's film 2001, and you look at Solaris, I don't know if either of you have seen Solaris.
Yeah.
That's a really impenetrable film. And it makes you, it makes 2001 look fairly easy to figure out. But there really isn't that much to figure out in 2001.
No, not.
It's a pretty straightforward story, up to a point. I would say that it's a realist film up until the Stargate. Once you get to the Stargate, then it becomes symbolic. I know when people watch these movies, this was certainly true back when these more challenging European films were starting to come over. People would always talk about symbolism. What does it mean? What's the symbol? What is it? I know it's symbolic. What is it supposed to mean? As if you could find some key to the code. And once you knew what the key was, it would all become clear. A lot of those European filmmakers were making things that didn't have any key. It wasn't symbolic in a way that could be solved. It wasn't as if you just understood what they were going for, that you could figure out what the story means. I mean, if they wanted you to understand it, then they would present it in a more easily understood fashion. They were intentionally opaque, and the idea. And Arthur C. Clarke said after he sort of adjusted himself to the disappointment that he felt when he saw the first cut of 2001, and he saw that all of his narration had been taken out, and he saw what a difficult and challenging film it would be. He adjusted himself over time because he saw the reaction that people were having, that this was a breakthrough film. And he came to start to say in interviews, if you understood this film from the first viewing, then we didn't do our job. Sort of trying to make the point that we were intentionally trying to make it difficult to understand what's going on. But I don't think that's really true until you get to the Stargate. And even the Stargate scene and the stuff that follows is not really that hard to figure out once you understand the basic concept there.
Yeah, I think he told that to Rock Hudson, because Rock Hudson walked out of the premiere and said, wanted somebody to tell him what this movie was about, and that was his response.
Well, Rock Hudson is a good example of the type of movies that were popular. This is why it's so important to understand the context that this film was made in. Rock Hudson and Doris Day were making the most popular movies in the world at that time. I mean, those romantic comedies, which some of them are very entertaining, but they're sort of mindless fun.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of mind to come up with mindless fun. I think that's true. But that was the sort of stuff that was being put out at the time. And that was the stuff that was popular all over the world. To make a movie, and the European films, incidentally, they were not big budget projects. European films, by their very nature, were done on relatively small budgets in comparison to what Hollywood is working with. So it was an extraordinary bit of audacity for Kubrick to say, I'm going to get a major Hollywood studio to finance this obscure film, which seems to be intent on challenging and frustrating the audience.
Yeah, it seemed like a big risk for MGM to take, or any studio at that time.
And it very nearly didn't work for them, because when the film first came out with the mixed reviews, after the initial release, the business started to drop off. And it was only because somebody had the clever idea of starting to run it as a midnight show to get the potheads in.
There you
go. It might very well be the first cult midnight movie.
Yeah.
And then it took off. Then it ended up being the second biggest hit of that year. You know what the first big hit was? Take a guess.
No, Rock Hudson movie.
Well, close. It was Barbara Streisand's musical Funny Girl.
No, okay.
Oh, okay.
Which I'm not knocking. It's a very fine musical. But that goes to show you the context that this movie should be placed in. That's the competition. Something that is easy to watch and fun, and you come out singing the songs, versus 2001, which most people probably had a very hard time with, you know.
Yeah, I've never seen it stoned. I may have to try it stoned.
Well, there are certain criticisms that I would make, and we can go into those later. But one of the things I think that doesn't really age well is that very lengthy Stargate scene. I can see why he was impressed with that enough to put that in at the time, because again, it was the first time anybody had done shit like that. The slit scan photography that produced those sort of patterns that sort of zip past the camera, which was also used in Superman for the opening titles.
And in Doctor Who.
And well, it's something similar in Doctor Who, and also something similar in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yep.
At that time, that was amazing to see that. But now we look at it and say, okay, well, we got the point. 5 minutes of this, 6 minutes of this, whatever it is.
See, I'm the opposite. I was happy with the ending, but I think, and I know why the opening of the movie is long scenes of spaceships set to the Blue Danube, is because, hey, we're showing people something new here. So that's, you know, watching it now, I'm just like, okay, I get it. You made model spaceships that look real. Moving along, I don't need an entire orchestra. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I would have cut that down a little bit.
Well,
I think that's the slow part for me.
Let me ask you guys, what would be your description of the plot of this? What do you think the point is? You know, the plot and the point. What would you say it is?
What I think it's about, I mean, I look at this as kind of like an artistic type movie. Yeah, we start off, as everybody knows, you know, if they had seen it, you know, you start off with early man, the ape version, and, you know, they're doing their thing. And it just kind of, but it's also, it kind of goes in sections, the story. It's just, it's like I said, it's like an artsy movie to me. Like if you're really, you know, into that kind of thing with filmmaking and everything, and artistic stuff, you're gonna really like it, you know. But like you said, there's people back in the day are like, what the hell, you know, what's going on over here, and now I'm over here, and now we're in space. I mean, what the, you know, I don't get it. Where are we going with this?
Well, you did understand, right? I mean, you didn't have any difficulty understanding when he throws the bone up into the air, and the next shot is the spaceship. You understood that we were taking a leap from that into the future, and you understood that the whole idea was that the monolith was teaching the apes to take that first step of making tools. It was the first step towards technology, and then the next step is spaceships. Right? So
that's kind of like I said, it's like an artsy way of doing it. But yes, it just went in sections, and it shows different time, I guess, days and time and all this stuff. So I really did like it. I appreciated the cinematography. Really, I did. Stanley Kubrick, I always like, you know, his films. They're crazy, but they're very artistic, and I like his I like his direction style. I really do. So that's what I took out of this film, is it's showing, you know, progression of man and our humankind, I guess you could say, not just man. But I think that's what I got out of it, but in an artsy way.
what about?
Yeah, I think you know, showing the tool. You know, they learn how to use a tool, and then they use it to get meat. Before that, they're just eating grass. Now they're eating meat with it, and they're killing the other rival. I guess they're not apes. Were we calling them apes, or are they just man?
Well,
the evolution. I just call them apes.
He called them man apes.
Yeah.
Or humanoids.
Yeah.
They were originally going to have something more like cavemen, but then they realized the problem they would face with the sensors if they had everybody's balls hanging out.
Yeah.
So
yeah, true.
Went for a hairier
No, I want that cut. The Stanley Kubrick.
That's
Space Odyssey ball cut.
Yeah, ball cut, like the asshole cut from Cats.
Yeah. But I think with that, you know, there were early man, the dawn of man, you know, the early man. That was the birth of us using tools, and you know, now having, you know, weapons and war. And then also when we get into now the first part of it where they go to the moon and find the monolith, I'm not sure what that has to do with any of it. But then once we get into like the meat of the story, the big chunk with Hal, I think it's a continuation of us letting technology kind of ruin us. I think
Yes.
that's what it's saying there.
Kind
And
of
then
like today.
yeah, and then yeah, exactly like today. And then
Well,
the end of the movie with the Stargate, I think they're trying to wrap everything up because basically the whole movie's about birth and rebirth.
right,
Dawn of man. They mentioned birthdays through all the whole thing, and then
right,
he dies and then is reborn as the star baby at the end. But
right.
so I don't know what the this is that one section gets me where they go to the moon and find that one monolith. And
Well,
I don't know what the monolith is other than probably God. Like
well,
a
it could.
facsimile for God.
It's supposed to be some tech. I mean, the story that they came up with when Kubrick hired Arthur C. Clarke, he invited him to come over. I think they set him up at the Waldorf, and they had extensive meetings that went on for a long period of time. And then he went off and started. The idea was that he was going to write a script, and Kubrick would.
It was based off a short story called The Sentinel, right?
Well, it was based off two short stories. They
Okay.
were originally, believe it or not, Kubrick had obtained the rights to a BBC radio play called Shadow in the Sun. And once he had hooked up with Clarke, he suggested to Clarke, maybe you could adapt this. And that was some sort of strange thing about lizard aliens invading or something like that. Anyway, Clarke said rather sniffily, I don't adapt other people's work,
Yeah.
especially since at the time he was considered one of the great science fiction writers. And this other person who wrote Shadow on the Sun was pretty much unknown other than a guy that writes plays for the BBC. So then Clarke suggested two of his short stories that had appeared in Amazing Stories and 10-story fantasy, two pulp magazines in the 50s. And one was called The Sentinel, and the other one was called Encounter in the Dawn. And the Sentinel describes an astronaut who's on the moon who discovers an obelisk type thing that's covered in some sort of force field, shielded by some sort of force field. And this is a big discovery, and apparently mankind spends years trying to break through the force field to get at the thing inside. When they do, it's destroyed. And the astronaut speculates that this was an alarm, that aliens placed that on the moon to let them know when mankind had A, reached the point where he could travel to the moon, and B, had the technology, atomic power, necessary to break the force field. So the last part of the story is the astronaut saying, now all they can do is wait to hear what the response is going to be. How are the aliens going to react when they see that the alarm has been tripped? And the last line, I think, is something along the lines of, I don't think we'll have to wait long. That was one story. That obviously is the monolith, and the discovery on the moon of the monolith.
Yeah.
That's where that comes from. The other story was a thing called Encounter in the Dawn. That was about a bunch of highly advanced race, which when you're reading the story, you assume is mankind in the future. And they're interacting while they're dealing with their own problems, which seem to be fairly severe. They seem to be teetering on the brink of societal collapse. They're also involved in trying to artificially evolve or help the evolution of a primitive species that they found on this planet. And at the end of the story, the superior race decides, oh, we can't do both. We're going to just take off and deal with our own problems. And the alien creatures that they leave behind, we're told, eventually develop the city of Babylon, ancient Babylon. So the idea was it's the primitive creatures that are us.
Yeah.
We're being visited by aliens, superior aliens, and they're going to try to help us. So that is also in 2001. We don't see the aliens except for the monolith. The monolith is their technology. So I have always found that is a flaw in 2001. It's using the same idea that Eric von Däniken made a lot of money with Chariots of the Gods. This idea that all the advances in human history are the result of the intercession of alien beings, superior alien beings. I reject that. I think that's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
But I can see why it was an attractive idea to Arthur C. Clarke when he came up with it in the 1950s. Eric von Däniken might have gotten the idea from him. I don't know. But the basic, the movie 2001 is broken down into 4 sections, although there's only, 3 identified sections with the subtitle, with the title cards.
Dawn of Man, Jupiter Mission, and what was the other one?
It's Saturn. Is it Saturn or Jupiter? I always
I thought it was Jupiter.
Jupiter is the one that doesn't have rings, right? Saturn has,
yeah.
so it is Jupiter, because they decided against using Saturn because they couldn't do the rings.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, those are the 3 sections that get titles. They have a title card for each. But the first section, the Dawn of Man, actually includes what could be considered another section, which is all the business on the moon, with Dr. Hayward Floyd traveling to the moon and giving that speech at the base. And a lot of those ideas that are being mentioned along the way are things that were important to Kubrick, because he originally started this whole project because he was curious about the idea of what the reaction would be in society if we had our first interaction with aliens. What sort of impact would that have on society? And you can see that makes its way into the movie, because that's one of the things that Dr. Hayward Floyd says. He says we haven't quite determined how this is going to affect society if we let the news out that we've discovered that there are aliens, intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. So we're keeping it all a secret. And matter of fact, interestingly, the secret that they use is that, or at least the cover story is that there's an epidemic that's broken out on the base. And that's why they have that scene with the Russians, where the Russians are interrogating them and saying, why wasn't our ship allowed? It was supposed to be an emergency landing and they weren't allowed to land. In Arthur C. Clarke's book, in his script and in his novelization, he goes so far as to say it was a virus. So that makes it more timely, right?
Yeah.
But that idea of the interaction between aliens and humans was really the inspiration for this. And the funny thing is, ultimately, there are no aliens in the movie. It is about human beings interacting with aliens, but we never see or hear from the aliens directly. They tried to come up with something that they could use to represent the aliens, tried all sorts of different things, and nothing worked. Everything looked ridiculous.
Yeah.
It just didn't have the technology at that time to do anything that would really be
I don't
convincing.
know. I like the Monolith. I like the idea of it. Almost like it's just like the only way they could really communicate would be to send out these like antennas that would help take their signal and make it go out further, almost like nodes.
Right. Well, that's an idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Arthur C. Clarke said that one of the ideas he had originally, and it was originally supposed to be a pyramid, but one of the ideas that they had originally was that the apes would see images in the surface of the obelisk, almost as if it was like a TV that they would be getting educational videos from. I'm glad they eliminated all that stuff, because I don't know if it was Arthur C. Clarke or Isaac Asimov who said that the technology of any sufficiently advanced alien civilization would seem like magic to less advanced. And that's the way it should seem. We shouldn't be able to figure out, there should be no analog to our technology today. It should be completely beyond what we
have,
right. So the idea of having TV screens, that was always the problem with all those science fiction movies in the past, is that they always assumed that you could create a set that would look futuristic by putting a bunch of radio, things like Plan 9 from Outer Space says you got a ham radio.
Radio, plugged into an outlet.
Right, plugged into an outlet, and they got like hair dryers on the wall, and or they'll put in a TV set, right? Somehow the aliens, when they arrive on Earth, will discover that they're using the same standard for television that we have. So he was smart to get rid of all of that stuff. And I think there's certain moments in 2001 that always sort of give me a thrill. And that moment when the man ape begins to bash that skull, and you realize that he's just had that thought.
Yeah.
Right? That thought that's going to be so important for the history of the human race. Kubrick was reading, apparently everybody was reading at the time, a book, a nonfiction book called African Genesis. That was written by a fellow whose name I don't have handy at the moment. His name was Robert Ardrey. African Genesis came out in 1961. Robert Ardrey was an American playwright. He had actually been nominated for an Oscar for a screenplay he wrote. And he decided at a certain point he was going to go back and to his roots. He had been an anthropologist, and he was going to go to Africa and study, the origins of man. And he came up with this book, which theorizes, and it's still a very controversial thing, although it was very influential at the time. He came up with this idea that mankind is descended from predatory, carnivorous, ancestors.
Right.
That the evolution to becoming predatory and carnivorous was important in our development. And I don't know if I understand his ideas completely. And as I said before, anytime we speak off the cuff, we're going to get stuff wrong.
Yeah.
But the book is online, African Genesis, 1961, so people can go and read it if they're interested. But if I understand the basic idea, what it was that our brains developed the way they did because we were hunters. We were eating red meat, which helped us. That was the product of our hunting. We got red meat,
Right.
which meant that we were getting the nutrients to be able to develop a more advanced brain. And also, because we were hunters, we had to be able to strategize. We had to be able to use our imaginations. We had to be able to say, well, I know that crowd of bison or wherever is where it's going to be at a particular time of day, and I can figure out a way to make sure that we can kill enough of them so that we have enough food for everybody. You have to be able to plan. You have to be able to strategize. You have to have an imagination. And those are all things that come from being carnivorous, because you can't develop the sort of brain that you need just eating twigs and vegetation.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's a very controversial idea. What he's basically saying is that our development as a species, the development of the human race and our society, is linked or the result of us being predators, of us being warlike. And that's one of the reasons why Kubrick has the first things that this guy does, we'll call him a guy.
Yeah.
The first thing that Moonwatcher, which is the actual name that was given to that character, that ape, the first thing he does is hunt. He realizes that crushing the skull of the animal can be done with the thing. First thing we see is him bringing down a bunch of whatever those creatures are. I don't know what those animals are.
Yeah. I don't
They
know.
look like hogs or pigs, but I know
Yeah.
that they actually have nothing. Second thing he does is he goes and he settles the hash of the tribe
Yeah.
that is keeping them away from the water hole, right? So that's, and then as soon as he does that, he throws the bone in the air, and the next step is we're in space. Now, an interesting thing, those ships that we see at first, that thing that's flying by that replaces the bone,
Yeah.
that was supposed to be a nuclear weapon. In Arthur C. Clarke's script, all those early ships that we see, there's a couple of cuts of different cylindrical type ships that are flying around the Earth. Those were all supposed to be nuclear weapons from different countries, China, Germany, the US, and so forth. And the idea was that weapon turned into these weapons. And now we're in a highly advanced state, right? Technology is basically running us now. And we're getting ready for the next step. The next step is, and incidentally, Kubrick eliminated all the references to nuclear weapons. He left the ships in, but he didn't tell us that they were nuclear weapons, because he was concerned that people would, after Dr. Strangelove, that they would think he was in some way trying to continue the same themes.
Right. Yeah.
And he had something different in mind here. But that was the origin, that was the genesis, so to speak, of the idea, was to use these ideas in that book and to say mankind advanced to this point because we were predators and we were carnivorous, we were violent, And the tools, the first tools we developed were tools of war, right? And it's still true in 2001. Still, the first technology you see is our tools of war. And so we're now ready to take the next step. And the next step is when the monolith is found on the moon, we go off on a mission to follow the signal that it sent to Jupiter. And then we have the whole business of how. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that business with how, that came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, it almost seemed when I was watching it, I was like, it kind of seems disjointed, but I guess it still kind of makes sense as far as like our technology.
Exactly.
And
that's the purpose it serves, right? When we get into the mission to Jupiter, we start to see that the astronauts are almost being treated like children or pets by the technology. Right?
Right.
You see that famous shot of him running around on the wheel like a gerbil or a hamster or whatever, right? And Hal talks to them the way a parent or a teacher would talk to a child, right? Or the way you might talk to your cat. So the point is now we've been taken over by our own technology, and Hal proves himself to be a destructive weapon by killing everybody on the ship. I'm not sure if I buy the explanation for that. That's something we can talk about. But anyway, it puts him in a position where finally mankind can just turn off the technology, discard the weapons, and go to meet our next step, which is to move up to a state of being of pure intellect, of being ethereal or spiritual beings. And so the last part, when he comes out of the Stargate and he finds himself in that Victorian room, or is it Edwardian? I always confuse the two. Anyway, he finds himself in that sort of antique.
Yeah, I think it's Baroque period.
Alrighty, and that technically, according to the script, was supposed to be the aliens' sort of cage, a sort of environment that they created for him that he would feel comfortable in, because they were going to keep him and for the rest of his life and help him to evolve to the next step. Now, at that point, the way the film is edited, it does become more symbolic. I don't think we're literally supposed to believe that that's the way it happened, that he turned into a baby at the end and is floating in space. You reach a point in the story where it becomes impossible to tell the rest of the story using being a realist, showing what is actually. You have to use conventionalizations. You have to create abstract images to suggest what's happening. So that explains the whole business. Like when first he's in his spacesuit in the room, and then he looks around and he sees himself as an old man, and then that guy looks around and he sees himself as an even older man laying in bed, and then the final thing is his hand going out, just like the finger in the Sistine Chapel, reaching out towards the monolith, and that's when he turns into the baby, and that is supposed to symbolize that he is, or the human race, he's representative of the human race, is taking the next step.
The next step, in evolution.
Right. And in the book, the novelization that Arthur C. Clarke wrote, the first thing the Star Child does is to blow up all the nuclear weapons that are surrounding the Earth. That's another thing that Kubrick did away with, again, because he didn't want nuclear weapons to be a part of this movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's what ruined Superman 4, so.
So that's the whole idea. This alien race is helping us to advance from a time when it's all biophysical. It's all about being grunting, drooling, bleeding creatures in the mud and dirt, and then taking the next step to being almost entombed in technology, living in a world that's clean and pristine and everything works, but you're subservient in a way to the technology. You're like a pet of the technology. Now, it's actually an interesting thing in that scene where Hayward Floyd is calling his daughter. She asks for a bush baby, and they actually shot a scene, apparently, or planned to shoot a scene where he buys a bush baby from Macy's, I guess over the same telephone, and to have it sent to her. And I think the idea there was Kubrick thought it would be fun to have folks living in that high-tech environment buying creatures as pets that were similar to the creatures that we saw in the first part of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, we get to that level of technology, and everything is so perfect that it becomes, we reach the limit of what we can do with technology. And then we have to discard technology to move on to the next level. That's really what the whole movie is about, in my opinion.
Yeah. Aaron, is there anything that you've seen in this movie that reflects today?
Like I said earlier, you know, how I guess technology kind of controls us a little bit, you know, especially the little squares we carry around, you know, real rectangles we carry around with us all day long.
Right.
You know, so that I think that rings true, and you know, we'll see. I don't know if we'll have something that has that kind of hold on our lives. I mean, if you look at it, I guess the Alexa and all that, they keep coming out with different models and they keep looking like eyeballs.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So,
Well, there's the influence of 2001, right?
yeah. And, you know, I really do believe that, you know, we kind of need to take a step back from that sometimes. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. But, yeah, I think, you know, maybe one day we will be all wearing the same thing and, you know, being controlled by whatever's telling us what to do, you know. So
Well,
if we're not careful,
if that's the case, then we'll be ready to take that next step. But
yeah,
become a space baby.
that's there are, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I had the same haircut ahead of my time.
Oh man.
There are some things that you could say are flaws in the predictions that he made. Like, for instance, I think that they were at that time, they thought that the future was going to be in space. They thought space exploration was going to be the thing. And it turns out that it's cyberspace. That's where the future was.
Yeah.
Not outer space. We haven't really advanced any great deal in outer space and traveling into space. I mean, there are some impressive achievements and some that have come fairly recently. But to be honest, the big leap forward was in computers. And they also surprisingly, they didn't anticipate miniaturization. The HAL's memory banks are this vast room filled with, you know, cartridges that look like cassette tapes. That's a mistake. Also, Arthur C. Clarke seems to believe that if you create a sufficiently intelligent computer, that it would begin to develop neuroses, because that's how he explains Hal's murderous behavior in the book and in the script, that they created a sort of unsolvable quandary or unsolvable problem for Hal by telling him he should never lie, and then immediately telling him that he should lie to Poole and Bowman about the mission.
Right.
And that sort of created some sort of malfunction that created neuroses, like almost like a person going crazy. And that's what led him to kill the other crew members and kill, I guess he kills Bowman or Poole. I forget which one. Gary Lockwood he kills. I don't buy that. I don't think that intelligence, that making a computer more and more advanced, more and more sophisticated, is going to first of all, it's not going to give it sentience. It's not going to make it fear death, for instance. It's just going to make it a smart computer. It's not going to make it, it's not going to develop human neuroses. I don't know anything about what I'm talking about ever. So that's a general statement. I never know anything about it. But my guess is that human neuroses come from environmental factors or biological problems. Something chemically wrong with our brains, or existing in an environment that perverts us in some way and causes us not to function properly, right? Computer wouldn't do that. The computer doesn't exist in a physical space. The computer is entirely in its memory banks. And the computer would never have a fear of death, because a smart computer like HAL, which is running everything on the ship, would know that it can't die. It's not a mortal creature. And even if it's turned off, it can always be turned back on. So the idea that it would fear the interruption of its consciousness, which is, I guess, the way we would express it now. A lot of people talking about what is consciousness now. That doesn't make sense either, because it wouldn't really know if it was conscious.
Yeah, I think that was one of the great scenes, though, was him,
Oh, yeah,
slowly
absolutely.
tearing him apart, and he's
Yes.
pleading for
Yeah.
his life through the whole thing.
Well, I think that's what makes this such an exciting thing, is that since it is about, to a certain extent, about predicting the future, we can debate whether or not they got it right and still love what they did. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a fantastically impressive scene. Kubrick always knew how to make things seem real, no matter how far out it was. And that's the great accomplishment here, is that this was made in a time before any of this technology was available. It was all made out of wood and shit. And yet it seems completely convincing.
Oh, yeah.
You really believe you're in outer space, even though they didn't set foot in space for a second, right? So that's impressive. But that was a mistake, I think. That was just a failure of his ability to predict. I don't know if Arthur C. Clarke ever addressed this, but it seems to me that in recent years we've had advances in artificial intelligence. We still don't see any sign that computers,
a sentient being, yeah.
they're just not, it's just not the way it's going to work, right?
No.
Because all along the way, the programmer is going to be programming it to avoid that sort of trap, right? So that doesn't, that to me is a flaw. Obviously, there are other things that are more obvious, like a lot of the companies, this was a film, one of the first films where there's a tremendous amount of product placement.
Oh, yeah, they had, and I thought that was great too, seeing all they were using IBM. I think it said IBM ThinkPad, but I really couldn't see it.
Well, he has IBM written on his wrist.
Yeah, I was talking about when he's watching the BBC on his little screen. I think it said IBM ThinkPad.
Might
I was
well
like,
have,
that's of course, that's a tablet. That's what we have now. So,
Yeah.
and of course, Bell South was already working on the video phone in the movie. Bell South had already created.
Unfortunately,
they just hadn't released it yet.
Unfortunately, Bell was out of business by 1982.
Yeah.
So, and what are the other ones? The other ones were
Pan Am was
Pan Am is long gone.
Yeah.
That went out of business in the 90s.
And of course, the hotels. One of the hotels was Hilton, and I think Howard Johnson was
Howard Johnson. Howard Johnson's pretty much out of business as well. So that's the risk of including all those brands.
Yeah.
It's not going to last. Obviously we can't fault them for not envisioning personal computers.
Right.
I mean, we might say, oh, they saw the future because they have a video phone, but he's in a video phone in a phone booth, which is completely different from what we have. We have our phones on our hip and in our hand. So that was kind of a miss. Not as bad as Blade Runner, though. I don't know why Blade Runner didn't have cell phones, because we had cell phones by the time Blade Runner came out, didn't we?
Not the first.
No.
Well, no, yeah, we would have. Yeah, I mean, they were the bag phones and the car phones.
the Zach Morris style. Yeah.
So you would think that they would have extrapolated
kind of
from
division,
that.
a little bit.
Instead, they have him talking on a payphone, just like in 2001. Well, his payphone is shittier looking.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, probably by that time the grid would have been destroyed, and we had to go start back over with payphones. You never know.
Landlines. It's all on a cable.
Yeah, landlines. It goes back.
I mean, if I remember correctly, I think even the original Star Trek series kind of had personal computers. They had the littler monitors. No, I'm talking about just on the desk. I'd have just a littler monitor that they would use, and it done video conferencing on that also.
Well, anybody who is taking the advice of all these scientists and all these folks in industry, that's the sort of advice that they were giving everybody. They gave the same advice to Star Trek when they were developing that. Say, we'll probably have something like this. We'll probably have flat screen TVs. We won't have, cathode ray tube TVs. So that was sort of stuff that we all were expecting. And so it is kind of, I think in Blade Runner's case, there was an aesthetic choice. I think Ridley Scott knew. He liked the look of analog TVs. He has them all over the place in Blade Runner. Sometimes in some of the sets, he just has them like sitting sideways with static on them. What the fuck is that?
Well, that kind of helped out because that movie had that film noir style mixed in with a little bit of future. So it was kind of, I guess, nice to not see cell phones and still using a payphone. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Well, you
Well,
never know. Like I said, they thought of, you know, maybe in the future things kind of went to shit somewhere, and they, you know, kind of like any other futuristic movie. I hate to, you know, bring this one up, but you know, like Judge Dredd or any of these other movies that are like, oh, this is what's going to happen in the future. Like DVDs are going to be like a currency, and like, you know, like that. It's like finding a treasure chest full of gold, which we all know that's a lie. But you know, all those little nostalgic things start, you know, popping up in these things, and maybe they think, well, and it, really, if you think about it now, we kind of do the same thing with style. I mean, if you look at the style now, it's like 1980.
mhm.
So maybe with technology, instead of being, you know, the style of clothes, maybe it's going to be electronics.
Style techno.
Maybe people want to go back to that. I mean, you already see people looking for VCRs, and you know, there's a whole group dedicated
Vinyl.
to that, and vinyl. You know, all this stuff's making a comeback.
Right.
So maybe that's part of it. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, in a way, the world of Blade Runner and the Judge Dredd and the other movies that you might think of that have that sort of dystopian future that they depict, they are closer to Clockwork Orange, which was the film that
Yeah.
he made after.
Yeah,
That was the flip side, right? It's like Kubrick gave you the optimistic version, and then he gave you the next one, which was the really pessimistic version, the pessimistic view of the future. And that, I mean, in Clockwork Orange, you definitely see the influence of the past on his future, right? Alex spends all his time listening to Beethoven. When he's raping, he's singing in the rain. So, and even like the clothes they wear, and he's striding through the record shop, he's wearing something that looks like it's, you know, 100 years out of date, and carrying a walking stick like he's Percy Shelley or somebody. But one of the other big ideas that Kubrick seemed to be going on about was this idea of culture shock resulting from, and I mentioned this before, the culture shock that results from learning that we're not alone in the universe. He seemed to think that this was a really important thing, and that's why he worked. It was one of the inspirations for doing the movie. I'm not sure that anybody really feels that way anymore. I mean, I know that there are some folks that are still talking about UFOs being real, and they might say, "Oh, the government is keeping it a secret because of the disruptive effect it would have on." First of all, I don't know how you really could keep it secret for very long, but also, at a certain point, it has to come out, right?
Yeah.
There's no way to keep that secret forever, because presumably if the aliens are making themselves known to us, then they're going to keep doing it, and it's going to eventually, everybody's going to see that the aliens have arrived. So I don't know if that idea, he had a couple of ideas, like for instance, his belief that that there definitely are other intelligent races in the universe. That may be true, but I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that we're probably never going to encounter them. So that's probably a faulty idea. He just assumed that based on the numbers that he saw, that it was likely there were other intelligent life forms in the universe. And so he took the next step and said, well, if that's the case, then surely we'll interact with them at some point. But that isn't true. No matter how far we get out into space, we're never going to be anywhere near where those creatures are, right? Because the distance in space is so vast that, you know, it's beyond the lifetime of a person to be able to travel, way beyond the lifetime of, generations of people to travel.
Right.
And if it was a sufficiently advanced race to be able to reach us, then it's probably not going to be a very pretty picture for us, right? A race that's so advanced would probably look at us as bugs, you know. So I don't know if I would be so optimistic as he is, and thinking that somehow they're going to be helpful.
Helping us.
That's probably not the way it's going to play out. But we won't have to come to it, because it's never going to happen. We're never going to be dealing with aliens. But what else?
So was this his practice for filming the moon landing.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that Kubrick has become such an icon for folks on the alt-right, the sort of conspiracy people.
Yeah.
Seem to find him a very fascinating figure. And that silly story about him doing the moon landing, which has been proved, I think was it Adam Savage?
Yeah, Mythbusters, yeah.
They proved that it would have been impossible
Possible to do
at
it, yeah.
time to do a live telecast, the way we received that video. It would just have been beyond the technology of the time. Besides the fact, all the things that the conspiracy theorists point to, like shadows in the wrong place, or
Yeah.
people not moving properly. Well, they showed by demonstration that actually everything
It would
was
work,
exactly
yeah.
right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a documentary about where he hid all of his confessions in The Shining.
Right.
You watch The Shining, you can see all of his confessions are in that movie that he did film the moon landing.
Well, one of the things I always wonder about, and that's obviously not the first time we've had the idea that somehow people that are engaged in some sort of conspiracy are going to be secretly confessing.
Yeah.
Why would anybody do that?
Yeah, why don't you just come out and say it?
Well, if it was supposed to be kept secret, why would you then turn around? Like, for instance, they say, oh, well, these things on the dollar bill are supposed to be indications of
Yeah.
Why would the people who are running the country be so stupid as to put stuff on the dollar bill that would tell you that they exist? Doesn't make sense. I think he would be very offended because I get the impression he was a very smart guy and he was had generally a progressive attitude about things. I guess he would be called a liberal, a realist, but had liberal leanings. And I think he'd be very offended if somebody said that he was actually involved. He was colluding with the government to pull off this terrible
cover-up, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. When he did Dr. Strangelove, he approached the military, the U.S. military, to get their help because you needed it to do a movie that involves bomber planes and things like that.
Yeah.
They read the script and they said, no, not surprising. On this one, on 2001, he had a subversive message, but he kept it hidden from them. And he approached the military and the government and industry leaders, and he pitched them on the idea that 2001 was going to be like a promotional film for the future.
Right.
Matter of fact, there's an advertisement, what it plays as an advertisement, a little short. I think it's called The History of the Future or something like that. And it's narrated by the guy who ran Life magazine, I think. Anyway, it shows behind the scenes stuff with 2001 and Arthur C. Clarke talking about what a wonderful future it is. And the point that they keep making is industry is going to be involved in this. The industry is going to be building all this technology. These are going to be products that people are going to be consuming. At the end of the film, the guy says, and be sure to get your advertisements in the next issue of Life magazine. He's talking to these big aerospace companies.
Yeah.
Right? So 2001 was positioned as almost like a piece of propaganda for the future, that this was the bright, shining future that we would be all living in. Kubrick tricked them into thinking that. And he had two scientists. One was from NASA. One was one of Verna Von Braun's Nazi rocket scientists that we brought over. Verna Von Braun was a Nazi as well. And they worked on 2001 and advised him, and apparently provided him with tremendous amount of stuff, a lot of material about how things would work in the future, what they were predicting for space travel. And one of them, at least, was very irate when he first saw when they went to the premiere, and they saw that all the stuff that they had told him about had all been cut out because he had tricked them, to put it simply. He wanted to create a realistic impression of what the future would be like. But he also had this larger story that he was trying to tell that started with prehistoric man and ended with people giving up the technology. And he had a little bit of tension there when they started to find out about HAL and what HAL would get up to. And there's a bunch of telegrams between IBM and Kubrick's people saying, well, we hope you're not going to have IBM on him.
Yeah.
Because he ends up killing everybody. You know? And they assured them, and they said, oh, no, that's going to be separate, But basically, they were bullshitting them. They wanted to get their help because they wanted to make the most convincing vision of the future that was possible. And yet at the same time, they were basically creating an anti-technology story, right? They were telling a story about how man is eventually going to move beyond technology and become a spiritual being rather than a nuts and bolts
Right.
type of physical being. So that was something that probably they weren't expecting. There were a couple of people that actually were deceived by Kubrick along the way. Alex North, who was the guy that did the score for Spartacus, Kubrick's previous film, who was a very well recognized music composer for movies, Hollywood movies. He didn't realize until he went to the premiere that they had taken all of his music out and put in sort of classical music tracks, right? And the classical music, and I think the choices that he made were brilliant. There's some stories that it was a sort of an accidental discovery, that they were just playing that music while they were reviewing the special effects, and Kubrick said, "Oh, that works." Whether that's true or whether he knew all along that that's what he was going to do, I don't know. But I still get a terrific thrill when I hear that music at the beginning of the film. Also Spake Zarathustra.
Yeah.
That's amazingly impressive. And then he uses it again when the monkey is beating the skull. And then again at the end of the film when the Star Child shows up.
My favorite piece of music is whenever we see the Monolith every time. That it's got voices behind it and it's all digitized, and that's just like chilling. That's
another guy that was George Ligeti, who was I guess a Russian composer whose music was also used in The Exorcist, which came a few years later. He was a serious composer. He was a serious, respected. He wasn't a guy doing music scores for movies. Kubrick apparently used that music without getting the rights. And Ligeti was a little peed off about it for a while. They smoothed it over. I guess they paid him off. And eventually Kubrick used his music again in The Shining. So yeah, that music is...
That's good. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah.
It's all done using symphony orchestras. No electronic equipment as far as I know. And it sounds more alien than anything you can do with electronic equipment. So yeah, it was perfect for those scenes. So those were the guys that Kubrick deceived along the way. Kubrick also took the Oscar for best special effects, even though he didn't do the special effects. It was done by a team of people. Apparently, there was a rule at the time that you could only have 3 people on the Oscar that you receive.
Right.
So they had a 4-person team, and actually it was much larger than that, but there were 4 guys that were heading up the team. So faced with this conundrum, Kubrick courageously said, "Well, that's okay. I'll take it." And that kind of pissed them off for a while.
Oh
too.
yeah, I bet.
But anyway,
everything we talked about with this movie, like the getting rid of the narration, not describing anything, leaving it up to your imagination or whatever you think is, they threw that all away with 2010. Which was just the worst sequel I think I've ever seen.
Well, that is a good demonstration. That shows you what happens when you put in all the explanation, when you try to put in dimensional characters. I mean, one of the things that I'm always on about is in certain movies, you don't want dimensional characters.
Right.
You just want the outer surface because we're not interested in those people. We're interested in something else. There's a larger story being told. So in this movie in 2001, the characters are bland almost to the point of non-existence.
Yeah.
They fade into the background, literally. But that makes it easier for us in a way to sort of empathize with them because there's nothing standing in our way of us sympathizing with them as human beings because we don't know anything about their background. We don't know they beat their wife or they're alcoholics or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's the power of reducing character development and also reducing to a point of eliminating any comic relief. There's only one joke in the whole movie, and that's the instructions on the toilet.
Yeah.
Right. And even that, to be honest with you, I don't think most people get the joke. It's a very dry joke. The toilet is dry as well, apparently. But taking those things out gives the movie a feeling of gravitas. You feel, and also another thing, I think we talked about this at one point when we were talking about silent films. one of the reasons why silent films are hard for modern audiences to watch now is because they require complete attention.
Yeah.
You can't let your eyes drift from the screen at all, because it's all being done physically. There's no sound. We don't hear anybody's voice. We don't hear the dialogue. In 2001, it's a very similar thing. If you were a blind person, or if you weren't facing in the right direction, you're facing in the, you might not even know that there was a movie
playing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's playing some strange record.
Yeah, there's no dialogue for what, 25 minutes?
Right.
Or the first dialogue spoken 25 minutes?
Unless you consider grunts from apes. But no human beings speaking for quite a while. And even when we get into space, there's still not much dialogue until he eventually comes into the moon station, into the station. I guess he goes to the station, the ring station, space station first. That's another flaw in the film. Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick were well aware of the fact that gravity on the moon is much less than it is on Earth. You only weigh about 30, a person who's maybe 180 pounds might weigh 30 pounds on the moon. And yet in the movie, knowing this full well, because it's in the script, when they get to the moon and Dr. Haywood Floyd is giving a speech, it's quite obvious that there's completely normal level of gravity. So that is a flaw. I originally thought that maybe it was the result of shifting scenes around, that maybe that was supposed to take place on the space station, and they moved it because the space station has its own artificial gravity. But it isn't. It is quite a long process of him going from the space station and landing on the moon, and that's where the conference is held. That's where he gives a speech. So that, I don't see how we can call it anything other than a mistake, although I suppose what he decided, he just didn't want to bother with that because he thought it would be awkward. It would make people look silly if they were all sort of bouncing around. I don't know how you could represent that realistically in a movie. What could you do?
And maybe they're all wearing the Velcro shoes like the stewardess have.
Well, the funny thing is, he could have solved that whole problem just by showing the Velcro shoes. He shows it when they're on the
they're walking, on the ship,
So I don't know why he didn't do that, but anyway, that's, I think, one genuine flaw. The other things are sort of like matters of opinion, but I can't see how anybody could defend the that gravity problem.
Right.
So where does that leave us? I got pages and pages of stuff. Go on for the next couple of, but generally speaking, this has sort of been embraced. It was interesting that Lolita, which was one of Kubrick's earlier films, was banned by the Vatican. They had their Legion of Decency, and they gave it the forbidden. Not surprisingly, I mean, it's a movie about a guy that's molesting children. This movie actually played very well in the Vatican. Apparently, they listed it as a must-see.
Really?
Apparently, under the belief that it was a sort of symbolic representation of the existence of God.
Right. That's what that's what I thought the Monolith was. I thought maybe they were trying to say that was a form of God or whatever.
Right. The problem with that, though, is for religious people, they believe in a personal God that's concerned about our moral well-being.
Yeah.
This God,
not our technology.
Right. This God is only interested in, this God is an alien life form and is not interested in our morality at all. Right. Matter of fact, this God is actually encouraging us to use weapons, to create weapons and to use them against our fellow man, our fellow monkey. So I don't understand. Sort of like the problem I have with people that talk about artificial, what's the term for intelligent design? There's a lot of the religious folks that think that this is, we got them, intelligent design, right? We can prove that there was some intelligence that created everything, that they created man. Because how could things be this way if there wasn't an intelligent designer? What they don't take into account is, even if we accept that there's an intelligent designer, that doesn't mean it's your, the God that you're worshiping. It's not a designer that's interested in our moral life. It's not a God that wants us to pray to him or has set down rules for who we should be sleeping with or what we should be eating on Fridays. So even if you're right, you're wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Even if we accept that there's an intelligence that made us, it probably isn't the sort of intelligence that they think is in control of everything, right? I mean, there's certainly no, we won't get into a discussion of the existence of God. But
So
anyway,
yeah, I think I can. I don't think I could recommend this movie to a lot of people. Only people that I think would appreciate the filmmaking aspect of it. I just don't. You know what I'm saying? I
yeah,
don't think you can tell somebody, "Hey, watch this entertaining movie."
yeah.
Yeah.
Not. You're that's you can't do that.
And also, you would have to say you got to see it on the biggest possible screen.
Yeah.
Most of the time, when people say that, they assume, well, that must not be a very good movie if the only way
Yeah.
you can enjoy it. But with some movies, right at that particular time, because Kubrick said in some interview, he said the studios think that they can get away. He was talking at the time back in the '60s. He said the studios think that they can get away with making mediocre movies and they'll still make money.
Right.
But things have changed now. We're competing with television. So when we make movies, we have to make movies that are amazing. They have to be events. And in a way, he was sort of inventing the blockbuster.
Yeah.
The guys that came after him, like Friedkin and Lucas and Spielberg, they made their films more easily accessible to general audience, which is why their movies made so much more than 2001 made. But in a way, what he was talking about was you have to make sure that when people go into the theater and they pay that money, that they're going to get something, an experience that they never forget. And for a lot of people who saw 2001 back in 1968, myself included, it really was that. I mean, I can still remember my experience. I was like 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
I can still remember my experience of seeing that film. And I was so frightened when I was watching those scenes of the astronauts in space. You know, I was just filled with tension because to me, as a child, the whole idea of going all the way out there in space and having nothing. I mean, some of the shots, the astronauts are just free floating. I guess they have little jetpacks or something
Yeah.
that's supposed to get them to where they're going. But Kubrick wanted to impress on the audience how lonely this sort of adventure would be. That he didn't want to make it fun. And he stripped out all the romantic aspects of it. I mean, yes, in the early scenes, we had which I think is probably one of the best special effects that's ever been done in movies, that scene of the big wheel with the music playing and the Pan Am Clipper flying towards it. That's really fantastic. It's completely believable, I think, you know. But all the space travel scenes and all the stuff that happens from that point, you know, from the beginning of the Jupiter mission, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
Kind of lonely, you know, sterile, lonely, you know, and I don't think that that was accidental. That was what he was trying to say. It's going to be kind of grim. And it also sets up the idea that this is not what we want, that we want to get to the next step. We want to do away with all this stuff and get on to the sort of becoming equal with our God,
Yeah.
which he does at the end of the movie. But yeah, as a kid, I was right on the edge of my seat watching this, and I couldn't understand why people would say, even my mother said, I didn't understand it. What was that supposed to be? Matter of fact, when we first went to see it, I went to see it with my mother and my brother. And when we sat down in the theater, when the first scenes came on, my mother thought, well, you come into the wrong movie. This was a problem my mother had a lot because very frequently we did go into the wrong movie. So she's looking at the poster and she's seeing this is all about space, rocket ships and things. And she gets into the theater and there's a bunch of monkeys eating, you know, stuff.
Mhm.
And she said, oh no, we must have come into the wrong movie. We almost walked out. As a kid, as far as I'm concerned, you got to see a movie that's about spaceships and you end up seeing a movie about monkeys. That's
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
good.
There you
No,
go.
all
Yeah.
right. Either
Bonus.
one.
Yeah.
Win-win.
Yes, if you can get both, that's even better.
Yeah, but this is definitely one of those. It's not a Star Wars. This is a movie for intellectuals and filmmakers and people who are interested in filmmaking. And that's the only people I think watch it now.
Mhm.
Well, the funny thing is, he did sort of come up with a way of making films that I wouldn't want to say it's pseudo-intellectual, but it is kind of a phony intellectualism because the ideas at the heart of 2001 are not really that profound.
But no.
I mean, a real philosopher would poo-poo this stuff in an instant. Matter of fact, even Pauline Kael, I don't know if I would say she was an intellectual necessarily. Perhaps among movie critics, she would be considered an intellectual. But one of her criticisms was this basic idea that man needs help in getting along, you know, to his next, you know, to the next step of evolution. She didn't like that idea, and she panned the movie. But I think you can disagree with some of the ideas and still be really impressed by
Oh, yeah.
how effective it is. You know? But it's not really. It's not the. idea that Kubrick was doing really profound intellectual movies, it's not. I mean, that's true for the average person, for the average film goer. They may seem that way, but I don't think that this is really that sophisticated, to be honest.
I've only seen it twice. The first time I watched it, and when I watched it today for the show, and if I never see it again, I don't think I'd be disappointed. You know what I'm saying? It's not that I'm going to go back to it and be like, oh, it's a rainy Sunday afternoon. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna watch 2001. It's not one of those movies.
You never know. I mean, I don't know what sort of setup you have there. Hopefully, the screen that you're using is bigger than the one I see in front of me here.
No, this is the TV I watch. That's what I watch my movies on.
Well, if you see it playing, and it does from time
if I
to
can see it in the theater, I'll go see it in the theater.
Go to see it in the theater, and I think you'd be more impressed. But it is about experience. It's not about storytelling. And he stripped all that stuff out because he was trying, as Spielberg recounted at one point after Kubrick died. Kubrick told him, I want to come up with a new way of telling stories. I don't want to use the old techniques because that's been done, right? And this is exactly what guys like Ingmar Bergman and Fellini and Kurosawa and Antonioni and all those guys, all the folks that were making important films at that time, they were basically saying the same thing. We've been watching the same couple of stories from Hollywood for the past, 50 years or whatever it was by that time. Let's do something different. Let's do something that really forces the audience to pay attention and to use their imagination. And in a way, it sort of mirrors what was going on in theater. For the first time, you had plays that were very challenging to audiences, that weren't done in the usual style, right? And they were very frustrating to some audiences, like Harold Pinter's plays, and there are a whole bunch of other playwrights that were doing things that were really completely mysterious to people, So he was right in step with that, of saying, I don't want to just give people a piece of entertainment. I want to challenge them to use their imaginations a little bit. And I'm going to help them by giving them some of the most spectacular images that anybody has ever given them, So anyway, I
like I said, I can appreciate the filming aspect of it, the special effects, all that. But like I said, it's just nothing that I ever have the urge to just sit down and watch, just to watch it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I would ask you to give it another try sometime when you feel like you're in the mood, because I find myself over the years, if I put this on when I'm not in the right frame of mind, I don't enjoy it at all. It feels like a chore. But sometimes, particularly if I'm showing it to somebody, like I fairly recently showed I have a fairly new TV. It's 55-inch, and I got a Blu-ray player, and I got the Blu-ray that they put out, a fairly recent version of it that they put out, and I was showing it to somebody else, and so I was sort of vicariously enjoying their first reaction.
First shot,
and I appreciate it enormously. And then when you said you wanted to do this, I sort of, in a feeling of, I got to do this again. I put it on and went through the whole 2.5 hours or whatever it is, and it was a bit of a chore, because some of the ideas have been digested completely now. Sort of the way we tell stories now. I don't think people would be that confused anymore if you did something new and you use some of these storytelling techniques. I don't think people would be confused anymore. Or if they were confused, it would be sort of like what happens when people go to see Christopher Nolan movies.
Yeah.
They would sort of get off on the idea that this is meant to be challenging and artistic.
Yeah.
My feeling is that guys like Christopher Nolan and that whole pack of filmmakers that intentionally make their films hard to understand, that they're really sort of, that is pretentious, in my opinion.
Right.
We talk about some of these so-called elevated horror movies. I'm not going to knock them, because first of all, I haven't seen most of them. So I usually wait till I see them before I knock them. But the whole idea of making films that are intentionally confusing or opaque, sometimes it's just because they don't have a story.
They don't, yeah.
And I see that.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that that's part of the problem. That when Kubrick did, particularly the Stargate scene, there were a lot of folks that said, now I understand. If you don't have an ending for your movie, flash some colored lights on the screen, say something mysterious is happening here, and everybody will think you're profound, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't work. That even Black Hole, the Disney movie, tried to do that. I don't know if you ever seen the Black Hole.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but yeah.
But that was
Okay.
like this sort of moronic Star Trek ripoff. And in the last moments when the ship goes into the black hole, they have something very similar to the Stargate scene. And they come out at the end and they're all in heaven.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's weird.
I really don't think you understood what Kubrick was doing. If that's your tribute to Kubrick, I don't think you got it.
Yeah.
But it is an easy thing to become a crutch for filmmakers.
Right. So, Aaron, how many settings did it take you to get through it? 'Cause I know you said before you didn't.
No, I put it on. Excuse me. I put it on and I got halfway through it and I had to stop it because I was doing something else, some father stuff that I have to do. So, but I came back and I finished it, and that was a while ago, but it was when we were first going to do it. I guess some scheduling stuff came up, but no, I like I said, yeah, I really enjoy the artistic aspect of the whole thing. I mean, I really do, and I appreciate it for that. That's what I appreciate it for. But like you said, am I going to sit on the couch and be like, what am I going to watch? Oh, let me turn it on that. Yeah. You have to be kind of like in a mood, just like, you know, if you're in the mood for Chinese food or something, you know what I mean? You just, you have to, that's just my opinion. But, you know, I really think with what William is saying is, yeah, we kind of missed the boat on that. You know, like it was a big, you know, fanfare and like go see this in the theater, and it was just probably just everybody was in awe of it. And now we are spoiled brats. I think we got 4K, and you know, we get to see all these minute details and alternate endings to. Why can't we just have something to where, you know, appreciate it for what it was, instead of, oh, what's that alternate ending about? Who cares? You know, put out something like this. And like you said, Carrie, and, you know, bless you for going through that mess. I didn't see the sequel, but, you know, just watching it, I didn't even know there was a sequel until you said. But, you know, certain films don't need that. And I think that's what this is. Appreciate it for what it is, you know. And I also agree with what you said, Carrie. If you're in the filmmaking, I think you should see you should see this movie. You should see, you know, the other Kubrick movies. You should see Tarantino's movies. And also go back and see what inspired them. There's a lot of shots that they took from older films and put it in theirs, you know. So that's my takeaway from it. Yeah, it's not my cup of tea, so to say, but I enjoyed it for what it was.
Well, it is, I think, also important for people to be able to recognize the advances that this film represents, and also say, but it wasn't really something I liked.
Yeah,
well, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to say, you know.
I think that's
some people aren't like that.
I was gonna say, I think that's why Star Wars gets all the credit for the big special effects, is because there was a more enjoyable movie, I guess, or a bigger movie.
You go from a movie like, you know, Space Odyssey, and then you go into Star Wars where people are flipping around with lightsabers, and there's a Darth Vader, and he's the main bad. I mean, come on. I mean, that's going to draw everybody in. Like, wow, this is great. But then you watch this movie, and you're like, I see where you got these fucking ideas from.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it even has references, like in the Phantom Menace. There's a junkyard or something. Or one of the prequels. There's a junkyard, and way in the back is the ship with the arms that is in from 2001. It's very, very obvious plant there. He's admitted that he was very impressed with Star Wars when he first saw it, and it's clear that there's some of the prequels, he has scenes that take place in these sort of pristine environments, right, that look very much like Kubrickian. Incidentally, can I get something off my chest?
Go ahead.
This is a problem I have with the Brits. I have another problem with the Brits.
And now we're canceled in Britain. No, go ahead.
The man's name is Stanley Kubrick. His name is not Stanley Kubrick. And yet, all the Brits who talk about this movie insist on calling him Kubrick.
Maybe that's how they talk. I don't know.
I know his name isn't Kubrick because I've heard Stanley Kubrick pronounce his own name. He would know. You can go and you can look at the trailers for this movie and for his other movies, and the announcer clearly says his name properly. And yet, to this day, including Brits who worked with him, insist on referring to him as Kubrick. And there's a guy on YouTube, brilliant guy, does wonderful videos, the same as Cinematography. And he did a whole series on 2001 about how it was made. Brilliant. But every 10 seconds, he's saying Kubrick. Even when the clips that he's showing are of people who were involved in the production who are saying Kubrick. How could you sit and edit something and hear somebody say Kubrick, 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 and you come away saying Kubrick, Kubrick, Kubrick? Do I seem like an unreasonable? Do I seem irrational? I'm unhinged. I'm like Hal.
I got something to get off my chest real quick. I don't think Stanley Kubrick, I don't think he's pretentious at all. Now, Christopher Nolan, that's pretentious. That I think that if you watch his movies, like he did a lot of, yes, Memento is a good film, but also it kind of is kind of one of those films like you'll never see again. Like, okay, I get it. He can't remember shit. But then he does all these artsy films, kind of. And then he goes into the Batman franchise. And now he's back to his weird stuff that you wouldn't even understand, like Inception. I mean, it's just, I think he's, I'm going to say he's pretentious. Not,
we have this
Stanley.
We have this whole genre now that people refer to as mind fuck movies.
Right.
It was great. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. The problem was that the changes that Kubrick and some of these other filmmakers that we mentioned, the European filmmakers, the changes that they were making, it was the first time these things had been done. They were blazing new paths. Now everything has been done. This is true in theater and in literature as well. You can only go so far in that direction because what they were doing was basically saying, we're not going to do the way it's been done, do it the way it's been done before. Well, at a certain point, you've broken down all those barriers, or you've overturned all those old rules of the way things should be done, and then there's nothing to do except to go back. Right?
Yeah.
And in literature, for a long time, everybody was sort of surprised when things like Harry Potter started to become just a phenomenal publishing success. And they were saying, well, why are adults reading Harry Potter? They said, because for the past 2 decades, the only books we get that appear on the New York Times bestseller list are these things that nobody can figure out what the fuck they're reading. The best writers in the world, the people that we're told are the great writers, and we can't understand the story. So finally, we got a story we can understand.
We don't care about Tom Clancy, okay? Not everybody reads Tom Clancy.
Well, Tom Clancy and Stephen King and a few others like Mario Puzo and those guys, they achieved success because they were actually writing stories that people could understand.
Right.
But there were a lot of like the great writers, the people that were held up as the great writers of the time. They were writing stuff that was very challenging to audiences, and the readers weren't getting the same satisfaction from reading their stuff. It's not that it wasn't great literature. It's just that it wasn't entertaining for people. So eventually we ended up going back to young adult fiction as being the sort of the leading thing in publishing, because it was the only stuff that had interesting stories with characters that people cared about, and that was what people were craving,
I want to say something else. I mean, since we're on soapboxes, I'm going to do one more. I have one more grievance. And every time I look at entertainment news, it's always says this: a failed movie has found new life on streaming. I don't give a shit. If it was bad in the theater, it's going to be bad on streaming. I don't know where they're getting their numbers from. I don't care, but I'm tired of seeing it. Every time I look, and it's like, this movie, sucked ass in the theater. So now it's found new life on Netflix or Hulu or whatever the hell. And I'm like, it drives me insane. That's what's driving me insane lately. I'm like, I don't care. So
Well,
I exit, I don't want to see it.
I'm afraid you're going to be seeing a lot more of that.
Oh, yeah.
I guess so. Well, you know what? Whoever, Netflix executives, whoever stumbles upon this podcast or whoever writes for whatever news outlet, stop doing that. Okay. It's annoying. I don't care.
They do it because they're trying to recoup some of their losses on
I
their
get
movies.
well, so people get tricked. They're like, oh, it did find new life. No, it still sucks.
Yeah. People, I think they're all looking for the sort of Shawshank Redemption thing.
Yeah.
A movie came out that didn't do well in the theaters, but then over the years it developed this reputation of being the best movie ever made, and it got the highest rating on IMDb. Or Blade Runner. Blade Runner was a bomb in the box office when it came out first. It only really became a big success on VHS.
VHS, yeah.
So there's probably a lot of examples of that. Now there's going to be a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to talk about that movie, Blade Runner. I mean, I like cyberpunk kind of stuff, and I mean that's right up there.
Oh yeah, I
so
love that.
That would be, I think that would be a cool conversation to talk about Blade Runner.
And unlike 2001, which only really has one version that exists, you can talk about
all the versions.
How many different versions of Blade Runner? Ridley Scott is still working on it.
I know. It's with all new alternate ending. Jesus, like how many endings do you need?
Well, you would be interested to know that when Stanley Kubrick first premiered this film, the reaction was such that he went back and cut like 19 minutes out of the movie.
Oh,
so
Jesus.
Imagine what it would have been like for you if you had to suffer through that additional.
Yeah, well, like you said, they had to cut out the caveman balls out of it. So
well, they cut out quite a lot. But he also did that with The Shining. He cut a scene, an important scene out of the end of The Shining. And he was also very particular about making sure that anything that he eliminated, it would disappear forever. Nobody's going to find it. He also did the same thing with most of the models and uniforms from 2001. As a matter of fact, one of the saddest pictures I've ever seen was a picture of the model of the Wheel space station laying in a dump in somewhere in England. Yeah. Apparently, what happened was he kept all the stuff in storage for it might have been a couple of years after 2001 was finished, but he was afraid that if he let MGM have it, that they would use it in other movies, which they would have.
Oh, yeah.
They always did that. They did that with Forbidden Planet, which is another movie we might want to talk about sometime. They used Robbie the Robot time after time and other things, including episodes of The Twilight Zone. They used the spaceship model from Forbidden Planet and The Twilight Zone and a bunch of other places. So Kubrick said, I don't want to see my models being used in other shitty things. So he had them all destroyed and apparently put some of the stuff in storage. And when he wasn't willing to continue to pay for the storage, so the storage company took all the stuff and just dumped it out at a dump. And somebody came by, they saw it. It apparently had been busted up by a bunch of kids. He took some pictures of it, which I will add in here at this point in our video. And he came back later with a car so he could take some of the stuff and it was all gone. So we lost our chance of having the Wheel space station, which would have been nice to have.
Oh, yeah.
The Academy bought that pod thing. I think it's the one that lands on the moon. I think it was a teacher, had somehow come into possession of that. He had it for years and then put it up for auction and the Academy bought it for like $400,000. So that's still, somebody has that. But as far as I know, everything else is gone.
Gone, yeah.
Which is sad. You apparently don't agree.
Well, I think I was trying to think that I think where I'd seen like the original model of the Death Star ended up in somebody's backyard. They just they didn't know what they had. And somebody drove by and saw it and was like, hey, I'm going to get that from you.
It's like, I don't even know what this is, but all right.
That's a real find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so anyway, well, I don't know where that leaves us, but I'm a big fan of 2001. I would recommend it to people, but I think it would have to be with the caveat that you be in the right frame of mind and make sure you're seeing it in the right conditions. Because if you don't, you're not going to appreciate it.
Stoned and on a big screen.
Well, stone might help. John Lennon said he claimed that he had seen it like a dozen times in some interview, and he said that if he could, he'd watch it every day.
Yeah.
But he was probably stoned every day.
Probably stoned every day, yeah. He would probably rather watch that though than sit with Yoko Ono. So
I
that
don't
was
know.
probably his excuse. That was his
Ah.
excuse.
Don't knock Yoko.
Damn it.
We'll miss
What's
her
wrong
when
with
she's
you?
gone.
Probably, yeah. All right, so Aaron, where can else find you on the internet?
I'm everywhere. No, they can find me at They Call Me Mr. Pro on Instagram and Twitter. That's my handle there. And I'm on Facebook too, Aaron Poe. So, I mean, come say hey or whatever. And yeah, that's where you can find me. And of course, I got other shows I'm a part of. Rabbit and Red Radio. You can catch a couple of shows I do on that network as well. So, yeah.
I was
That's
going
where
to
you
ask you
can find
something about that. I seen somebody posted production stills of the new Halloween, and there's a billboard that they put up that said Rabbit and Red. I didn't know if that was you guys or not. Did you
No,
buy ad
Rabbit.
space?
No. That's why it's called Rabbit and Red Radio. I
Okay.
think Rabbit and Red is something that's in the Halloween film,
Oh,
Ah.
okay.
but the original Halloween. So, but yeah, that's what it's named after, Rabbit and
Okay.
Red Radio.
Well, that makes sense then.
So yeah. No, we didn't buy anything. We ain't making anything. I'm a part of it. Of course, we're not making money.
All right, William,
Well,
where can everybody find you at?
I'm on Facebook under my name and on Twitter under my name, and I have Facebook and Twitter accounts or pages for my two films, Demon Resurrection and Sleepless Nights. Demon Resurrection is available on Tubi TV, on Amazon Prime, on Zumo TV, and a bunch of other places. Sleepless Nights is getting it's a movie that I made 23 years ago, and I've been re-editing it and remastering it, and that'll be re-released very soon. So people should look forward to that. It's a vampire story. Nobody could accuse me of being pretentious, I hope.
Right.
Vampire stories and zombie stories is what I'm doing, but the next one will be pretentious.
There you go.
Nice. Before we leave real quick, you just reminded me of something. I have to plug it. Death Park The End is going to be available on Tubi very soon. And it is available on Plex right now. It's streaming on Plex. So there you go. And I make a short cameo in the beginning of it, and that's it. But it's a good slasher. Yeah, it's a horror movie. So
you play the TV announcer, or
yeah. I'm a news anchor in the very beginning of it. So
well, that is reason to watch it.
I know.
Just watch it for that. Yeah.
There you go. And well, yeah, it lasts about 5 minutes. So yeah, they'll get credit. No, it's a good movie, and Ken and them are working on some other films. It's going to be really cool this next year.
Have you gotten your credit on the IMDb yet for that?
Yes, I do. I got credit on the IMDb. I didn't even know I had.
Yeah, you got to make a Wikipedia page about you now.
I guess it's gonna be a short damn.
It's a lot harder to crack Wikipedia than.
Yeah. Calm down, Carey. No.
Did you get your other credits from doing your podcasting stuff or videos online, or were you on other films?
No. It's I guess because I was a part of Indiegogos, you know.
Oh,
I get like
special things.
Just special things. And
this show has a credit on IMDb for
it does.
Reunion from Hell.
Oh, really?
There you go.
Yeah, movie.
Oh, that's great. Well, no such thing as bad publicity, right?
No, there's not.
So.
All right. Well, this was a fun episode. I enjoyed talking about this movie. And until next week, we will continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.